Hello and welcome to episode 5 of TL Blue, your fortnightly cybersecurity podcast focused on important cybersecurity news for Australian organisations. My name is Brad Morgan. I'm the Triskel Labs Security Operations Centre Manager, and as always, today I'm joined by Richard Granger, the Triskel Labs DFIR Global Lead. Richard, what's on the agenda for today?
Hey Brad, as usual, quite a few topics to run through today. We'll be starting off with the Qantas App debacle, where it was exposing other customers' details, which was a fun one.
You mean you got some interesting boarding passes coming up in your Qantas App?
Yep.
That was fun.
I know. I always wanted to go on another trip, so just use that one.
That's it.
We'll be talking about millions of records that have been leaked in a New South Wales club's data breach as well, which has been on the news.
That it has, yes.
Yep. We'll be discussing the latest on Australian losses to scams. Overall, we're seeing a decline, but we're still losing billions, apparently.
Yeah, it's interesting, the decline, given some of the big data breaches over the last couple of years as well. So, yeah, cool.
We'll be talking about vulnerability of the fortnight, so a couple of nice vulnerabilities for Cisco ASAs, just to add to our continued fortnightly schedule of perimeter devices with vulnerabilities.
Yes, always good fun tracking those at the moment.
Yep. And finally, wrapping up with what's been happening in the SOC and the DFIR teams over the last fortnight.
We kind of hit it at the top, but let's talk about Qantas and some mystery flights that we could have gone on.
Yeah, so this all sort of kicked off on the 1st of May. So that was last week, where people woke up and in their Qantas apps, they were actually seeing other customers' account information, their point scores, status tier, travel destination, and in some cases, even boarding passes as well. I think I saw a post on Reddit about it that morning where someone's like, why can I see this person's boarding pass in my app? Yes, apparently some of these sort of, I guess you can say, glitches in the system allowed people to change people's seats, allegedly cancel their flights altogether, or even book a new flight under their name.
Yeah, that was pretty interesting, isn't it? It's pretty concerning when what we're assuming is a misconfiguration in the app results in that kind of, I guess, almost data leak. But allowing people to take action on other people's accounts is quite concerning.
Yeah. Qantas were pretty quick to come out and say that there's been no indication of a cybersecurity incident or an attack. So I think probably along the lines of what you said there, it's probably some kind of misconfiguration or something was pushed to production without proper testing or something like that that sort of resulted in this.
Yeah, I mean, what did you say? It was the 1st, so that was Wednesday morning. Yeah, okay. I mean, it is interesting. I would agree. I wouldn't have thought that a threat actor would be going in to make those kinds of configuration changes. They'd be more interested in trying to get the data for themselves and cause other havoc, in my opinion. So yeah, this does look like it was definitely a misconfiguration. But I think I would assume, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, even though it was a misconfiguration, it would still have some of the implications of a data breach for Qantas.
Yes, it's going to be interesting to see sort of how this plays out. Qantas, so they had a couple of updates. They were sort of tracking on the website, and there were a couple of updates throughout the course of the 1st of May, but nothing since then. It'll be interesting to see whether this forms, an actual data breach, because some sensitive information would have been available, I guess, and obviously we're not lawyers, so we won't sort of be able to comment on it in a lot of detail. But I guess it'll sort of come down to whether the information that was available to other people would sort of, reach that threshold for being able to cause harm or not.
Yeah, look, it's been 12 months since I flew Qantas, but I'm trying to cast my mind back to the app, and I know you've flown internationally recently. If you saw an international boarding pass in the app, that's got some pretty sensitive information on it, going by memory. So I would have thought
Yeah.
there would be a fair bit of PII there.
Be interesting to see if the sort of the OAIC open up some kind of investigation to this to get a better understanding of what happened or not.
Well, let's move on to another unconventional data leak, and this time we're looking at millions of records leaked in a New South Wales club's data breach, and this one looks like it was a third-party issue. Can you walk us through this one?
Yeah, so essentially what seems to have happened in this particular case is there is a software company called Outerbox, which is an IT provider. So what they would do is essentially provide the sort of IT, I guess, software and backend and everything like that to essentially for sort of hospitality venues, so the clubs in New South Wales, essentially allows someone to, when they come in, you scan their ID, you validate who they are, and this is what their sort of service was doing, was allow you to capture that information and sign information. So what sort of happened is a group of unknown individuals. I say unknown because that's sort of what we know at the moment, but there are sort of claims that they're offshore developers that were subcontracted to Outerbox, and essentially they're sort of claiming to have stolen or taken large amounts of this personal data that was being stored by the platform. This has included some things like facial recognition, biometrics, driver's licenses scans, signatures, addresses, dates of birth, slot machine usage, and all sorts of, I guess, juicy information in terms of being of value to threat actors. The New South Wales Police were quite quick to respond. I wonder if that's to do with, sort of the large scale of people that might be caught up in this data breach, and they established the Strike Force division to investigate it. And shortly afterwards, I think it was only a few days ago, they actually executed a search warrant and arrested a 46-year-old man in Fairfield West, who will be charged with blackmail as well.
Yeah, so I mean, I find that quite interesting, that offshore developers had access to live data. Best practice is to always sanitize developer data or testing data. It should never be exposed outside of the core platform, in my opinion, and following I guess accepted norms in the industry. It should never be shared for that kind of use. So I mean, this is concerning. For me, one of the things there is the slot machine usage. That's something that you really don't want being shared out there. But it's also all of the other information. Like, you get a copy of someone's driver's license, including the signature. You can go to town quite easily that way these days. So I guess what are some of your thoughts around this one?
Yeah, I agree exactly what you're saying in terms of the data. So, it's always best practice if you're working in systems like this where you've got sensitive information, you have a segregated testing instance, things like that, where you use sort of anonymized data or just something that's not important and meaningful, and it's sort of separate. And in theory, people that are developing these apps should be sort of focused on that data, not getting access to live production data, which seems to have been what's happened here. And you're right, all this information, the driver's licenses, the addresses, dates of birth, all that kind of information is very useful for threat actors who may be able to take some of this and then go do nefarious things, like opening up lines of credit in people's names or new bank accounts for sort of, money muling and things like that. It does sort of open up quite a sort of large, I guess, threat vector there.
It does, and it's also, I mean, from a personal point of view, how many of these people overlap with Optus or Medibank? The amount of IDs that had to be reissued as part of the Optus breach a while
Yep.
ago.
Go do it again.
Yeah, I mean, if this data is since that, and you're an Optus customer and you know that you've been caught up in this breach, I'd be asking those questions. I mean, and we know the cost to Optus was huge, right?
Yeah.
Like, and for these clubs involved, I think the cost for them is going to be absolutely massive as well.
Yeah.
And it could have been 100% prevented had they gone through and anonymized that data and had an appropriate data sanitization process before they even thought about engaging developers.
Do you think that this information should be kept?
Look, I understand where they're coming from. I must admit, I've got family who live in New South Wales, and I have been to their local RSL with them for dinner, and they do take a lot of information, and I've questioned it a number of times. But I know that we've got an extract here. Thank you, Rich, for finding it. The Registered Clubs Act of 1976 that says they need to hold a fair bit of information about their visitors and their guests for at least 3 years. So, I get where they're coming from a regulatory point of view. But in this day and age, this was written in 1976. It's
Exactly.
Would have been updated a number of times since. But I think in 2024, we need to be thinking about these things, and we don't want organisations holding our data unnecessarily. And it might be something from a sorry.
Yeah, I agree. It's like a point in time thing. It's like the purpose of looking at someone's driver's license is to validate their age, or in this case it says that they need their address and things like that. But yeah, it's like it can be a point in time thing, right? You don't need to take a photo of the ID and keep it for 3 years. I think you're right. It's kind of the law sort of might need to catch up with some of technology as it's progressed since this was written.
I agree. I mean, and I look at when I was in the US, certain venues over there, you had to be registered to gamble, and I've seen Crown slowly bringing that in over here as part of their new anti-money laundering rules. You have to have a Crown card to go and use slot machines and things like that, which I don't. But I have seen venues in the US where you have to have a card to even use the tables. If you want to go and play a hand of poker, you have to be registered with the venue. So it's something that it may actually get worse before it gets better over here, because I think we are starting to go down that route where you're going to have to be registered for those sorts of activities. But I'd love to think that regulators would be thinking about who needs to hold that data, where they need to hold it. Let's be honest, ideally, that data would actually be going into a central database held by the regulatory body, not held by the clubs themselves individually.
It validates that
my
this
preference.
information is valid and true, and I guess that kind of ties back into people caught up in Medibank and Optus, where and I mean we've seen it in ransomware attacks as well, where organisations just they have the data and they've held it for years, and unfortunately it's been exfiltrated by the threat actor, and it's resulted in a data breach, where and a lot of them sort of look back in hindsight and go, we probably didn't need to actually have this data anymore.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've heard you and several other people in the DFIR team discuss there's always a backup of a historic CRM somewhere in the environments.
When they're migrating to cloud to take a backup before.
Yeah, and how often do we see those exfiltrated? And they're a goldmine, and people forget they're there. You have staffing changes, you have new people into the business, existing people exit, and people forget that these things are there. And if you're not doing appropriate data discovery, it is a big risk. Those top two, at least the clubs one, really feeds into this next one, which is the National Anti Scam Centre report that was released. So what they've said is scam losses have declined, but Australians are still lost $2.7 billion. Can you walk us through this one, mate?
Yep, it's a lot of money.
It is. That's
yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess the key points from this report is the National Anti-Scam Centre. They were established in 2023, I think. So sort of, just over a year of operations. But they released their report for the calendar year of 2023. This came out on the 28th of April of this year. And to sort of summarize the key points from this is essentially it's capturing information from incidents or data that's been reported to a couple of bodies, namely ScamWatch, Report Cyber, AFCX, ID Care, and ASIC. And at a high level, so essentially over that calendar year of 2023, Australians made over 601,000 scam reports, which was actually an increase from 2022, where there was 507,000. So 18.5% increase in number of actual reports of scams taking place.
I'm not surprised there was a big increase. 18.5% is a pretty big jump. But when you think about some of the data that was leaked last year, it's probably not all that surprising. I'm surprised it's actually that low, to be perfectly honest.
I think that's sort of a good thing to note about these sort of bodies that are collecting this data is it's not necessarily compulsory to report a scam to them. So I think that whilst we do have a large number here, there's probably still quite a few cases that are going unreported as well.
I agree. Yeah.
They also also talk about the numbers. So whilst there is an increase in the scam reports, so the number of scams that are occurring, there's actually a loss in the losses have actually dropped. So in 2022, Australians reported losing more than $3.15 billion to scams. And in 2023, that number was $2.74 billion. So overall, 13% decrease in the actual loss.
I mean, we're not talking about small figures here, right? The government's just announced a $3 billion hex change to hex this week. And that's making headlines. Yet, 23 we lost $3.15 billion to scams. That is known, as you say. Not everyone reports, and then another $2.74 billion. So we add those together. That's we're pushing towards $6 billion in 2 years lost to scams.
It's crazy.
It is mental. We're talking about a cost of living crisis. We're talking about people not being able to afford to put dinner on their tables. And we're losing as a country nearly $6 billion in 2 years that we know of to scams. Surely, as a country, we can do better.
Yeah. I mean, that's I guess ties into what they're sort of talking about. So the National Anti-Scam Centre, over the next 2 years, they're basically looking to bring in some technology that's going to hopefully reduce the number of scams that are taking place, and also obviously therefore the losses involved. Some of the techniques that they're looking to do is they want to basically make coordinating intelligence and distributing that information a lot easier. So couple of things that they want to do is they want to be able to make it easier for banks to freeze accounts. So whether that's a bank account that a threat actor is getting the money transferred into, they're looking to make it so that telcos can block calls and SMSs. I know I'm looking forward to that one, because it seems like every second call I get is some kind of scam.
Yeah, that one's an interesting one. I tell everyone I know to turn on. I mean, I use Android. I tell everyone I know to turn on the protections that are available on Android devices, and it is pretty reliable. It picks up most of my spam. Yeah, Yeah,
Well, since I
Apple fanboy.
transferred to iPhone, I know.
So that is something that Samsung's doing, or Android is doing within the phone itself. But I think there needs to be, an onus on the telcos to be taking more action here, and making this harder for the threat actors or the scammers in this instance.
Agreed. Another sort of tactic they want to do is basically getting digital platforms to take down website or accounts. So I guess that's sort of, for phishing sites and things like that, they want to be able to, quickly take those sites down to stop people from entering credentials or, downloading payloads and things like that, which is...
That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Actually having a quick reaction to take down requests and not relying on the hosting providers. That'd be really nice, because I know we've had to do this a number of times, and our clients have to do it pretty frequently, and it can be a pain.
It's not an easy process, no. I guess the biggest issue is that obviously a lot of the infrastructure that's used by threat actors is all set up overseas, so it's kind of hard to get the takedowns actioned.
China has a great firewall of China. The telcos know where our traffic's going, unless you're using particular technologies. But for most of the population out there, they can see when the data's going to these websites. And once a website's been identified as malicious by someone like us and reported to the ACSC, I think there should be a mechanism there to be able to put a block in place at the telco level. That might be a little bit too big brothery for a lot of people out there, and if it is, I apologise. But I'm thinking about, I want to protect my mum. I want to protect all of the people out there that, again, are struggling to put dinner on the table. And I think that is an action that could be taken to protect them. And there's infrastructure needed, and there's privacy things to be considered, and that sort of thing. But if you're doing it with a high degree of confidence.
Yeah, and it's going to help for, like, we had an engagement recently where we identified data exfiltration going to a hosting provider that was in Russia. So, legal did go through the process of requesting a takedown, but obviously the hosting providers doesn't care. They're not going to do anything with it.
No.
So I guess, there needs to be some kind of solution.
Well, it needs to be. It is something in the national interest, and there is no one suggesting nationalisation of anything, but it is in the national interest to improve this. And surely, as we can agree on a way forward, as you say, if something's hosted in Russia, we know they're not going to comply. So let's just block it. Okay, domains and IPs can be changed quite easily, but hey, let's kill it. It raises the barrier of entry for the malicious actors. That's rule one for us. That's what we tell everyone: raise that barrier of entry, make it harder for them, make it cost more for them.
Yeah, more difficult.
Exactly. So, all right. Any tips on spotting these scams, mate? I know I've started. My son is 14. He has his own phone. I've sort of shown him a few scammer fight back videos on YouTube. Just to help him understand what these, what some of these things are, and what it sounds like, and that sort of thing. So that's one approach. I don't recommend everyone goes and does it, but what are some tips that you might have out there for people?
I think on like a high level, if something sounds too good to be true, it's probably not real.
It's not going to be every day you've got someone ringing you saying you've won a vast sum of money. And they're definitely not going to ask you to transfer money to them to confirm that the bank account's active. A bank or a financial institution or a vendor is never going to ask you to log into your banking while you're on the call and do screen shares and things like that. I mean, we're talking to a technical audience here, so they know that, but maybe it's just worth reminding the general public of that sort of thing.
Agreed. Sort of just, talk to people that you think might be, fall victim to some of this stuff. Obviously, some of the threat actors behind this can be very convincing. Otherwise, they wouldn't have made the, almost $6 billion over the last 2 years.
That's it. And, I guess one of the things called out in this report is it is people over the age of 65 had the largest increase in falling victim to this. So if you know people in that age group, and we all know that those people aren't necessarily tech savvy, talk to them. People ask me what I do for a living. I tend to avoid saying I'm in cybersecurity because then everyone wants to talk about it. But when I do mention it, the conversation does quickly turn to scams. It is in the consciousness of most people out there about this sort of thing. And I think we have a responsibility as professionals in the industry to help educate the greater community and try and protect people. Let's jump onto some perimeter firewall or perimeter device fun and games. This one is ASA this fortnight.
Yes, Cisco's turn.
We'll just keep passing the baton around, I think. Just keep moving around the outside. That's it.
Get a dartboard going just with the big vendors on there and just throw a dart and see which it'll be this fortnight. But yes, another perimeter device vulnerability. So this is for the Cisco ASAs. There's actually 3 vulnerabilities. I won't go through all the numbers, but essentially 2 of them are high, have been rated as high with a CVSS score of 6, and one of a medium with a CVSS score of 6 as well. But essentially what it's doing is it will allow, there's a couple of different things. One's a denial of service. And then we're looking at the other ones where a threat actor would be able to escalate privileges and also execute arbitrary commands on the underlying OS with root level privileges as well. So remote code execution, which is always a fun and wonderful vulnerability to have on something like this.
Well, yeah. Always great fun. So I guess I mean, we've said it all before, right? And I do want to quickly clarify when you said the highs, a couple of these, their CVSS bases are actually quite higher than the 6 that you mentioned. So I've just had a look at 2024 20353 and NIST via the NVD, is showing that as an 8.6. Using CVSS 3.1, and the next one down being the 2024 20359 is showing as a 6. So yeah, that first one is quite high. Just when you said it allowed remote code, I was like, hang on, that's got to be higher than a 6.
That's what I was thinking when I was putting this down. I'm like, this seems awfully low for this kind of vulnerability.
You mean it's difficult to understand CVSS? No. So look, sorry for correcting you there. I just wanted to make sure we were correct. What would your guidance be around this one today, mate?
Well, so ACSC have come out saying that they've confirmed that these exploitations have happened for Australian organisations. So we know it's definitely something that's happening out there. So the guidance, and we could probably get a soundbite of this for from previous episodes and put it in here. But making sure that you're patching. So Cisco have released software updates to address all of these. Recommend that you do that as a priority. If you can't patch them because you're running, end of life versions of this, highly recommend that those are discontinued. And
I want to throw something in here. Should we be using end of life perimeter infrastructure?
No, we shouldn't.
Is that a risk that any CISO should recommend to a business they accept?
No, but it does happen.
It does
Sometimes
happen.
you see that it's so end of life and outdated that it's actually like secure through obscurity because like no one knows how
No
to
one's
exploit it. Yeah.
yeah. But I mean, this stuff, if you've got non-supported perimeter kit and you've accepted the risk on your risk register, you need to be asking yourself if that was a good idea.
Yeah.
That's my recommendation. I mean, and if you haven't even thought about your perimeter, you have to.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
You're right.
Sorry for interrupting you there, mate. It's just
No,
something
you're 100% right. It's like it's very different having a network perimeter device like a Cisco ASA that has a vulnerability like this versus someone's endpoint having an outdated Adobe.
Mate, I will tell you right now, I would much rather see a client running a 2012 Exchange server internally because they have to run a particular piece of a particular part of their business that relies on that internal Exchange server, providing that Exchange server is segregated and controlled, and we have EDR and we have SIEM and we have all of that on there. I would much rather see that risk accepted over an end of life or unpatched perimeter device. Because that end of life or unpatched perimeter device is just Swiss cheese waiting for someone to walk through the holes. At least on that internal 2012 server that we all know, I mean, it's 2024 now, right? You should never have a 2012 server, but at least you're having to jump box to it. You're having to get through all the network segregation and you have to be in the network first to get to it, right? To me, it's weighing up those risks and understanding which one poses the greater risk to the business and where you need to spend your money. And it's on the perimeter.
Because, I mean, you can still install tooling on a 2012. Like, it might not operate to 100% as it would if it was on like a current version of Windows Server. But when these kind of perimeter devices, you can't really install an EDR tool.
No, I can't tell you if they're being.
Yeah, the best you can get is a syslog, most of the time out to a SIEM.
And if they're that old, how good's the syslog coming through? There has been some great improvements in some of this edge gear over the last 5 or 6 years, or I'd say 3 years. But I mean, a 2012 server, I can at least use Windows logging itself to write custom detections. I can't do that on an edge appliance. So yeah, that's my rant. That's the second rant for me today. I'm in one of those. It's one of those days for me. But I hate seeing them. If I see them with a client or a new client coming on board, that's the number one recommendation from us is get rid of them. They pose far too much of a risk. If you are a CISO or if you even work in IT out there and you've got these in your environment, start that conversation, because otherwise you're going to be talking to Richard in a completely different context and it's going to be a DFIR call.
No one likes talking to us.
not in that context. Speaking of, mate, what's been happening? In all honesty, I've just had a couple of days off. So fill me in. What's been going on in DFIR?
Yeah, nothing sort of too crazy, to be honest. I mean, we've sort of got a few jobs on the go, but in terms of what we're seeing, nothing is really, out of the ordinary, I guess, in terms of, initial access. We're seeing, Citrix NetScaler still being a initial access vector. We're still seeing things like remote desktop gateway exposed to the internet and being brute forced by threat actors. So yeah, it's sort of the same old things we're seeing.
I'm lost for words. Remote desktop still being exposed is scary. I said it earlier on. It's raising the barrier of entry, making it more difficult, not making it easier. And when we're making things like this available to the internet, it's making life easier for threat actors. And look, Sorry, you
No,
go
no.
on.
No, it's a hard one. It's because, like, we know how bad it is, but a lot of the organizations we're talking to, obviously because they've had a compromise, like they just don't know, and it's a hard one to. I guess this comes down to what we're trying to do in Australia as a whole with making that's the goal, is by 2030 we're the most cybersecurity country. I mean, it sounds great.
We've got a long
but
way
we've
to
got
go.
a long way to go. Yeah,
A heck
100%.
of a long way to go. I think we've got more chance of landing people on Mars than us becoming the most secure country in the world by 2030.
Yeah.
I hate to be pessimistic, but with some of the things we see out there,
I know security is just like it's hard because you might be a very small business. You've got an IT person that they might have an understanding of security, but they're not sort of trained in it. They're not really well versed in what to do, and it's hard to be able to figure out how can I monitor my remote desktop gateway to see if I'm being brute forced, or how do I set up a VPN to put it behind that and things like that. It's hard.
And let's be honest, I've mentioned cost of living, but the cost of doing business is going up for a lot of the businesses that are being targeted. They don't want to go and spend money on security monitoring right now. Again, they're struggling. So,
yeah,
it is tough because it is an added cost for a lot of these businesses to go and put that in place as well. So I think there needs to be things at a national level to make this easier for organisations. And look, the ACSE is, they do put stuff out for small and medium businesses and things like that. And I highly recommend those organisations, if you don't have a budget, educate yourself. Go and read up on what the ACSC are putting out there, and take those minimum requirements that they're recommending you take. For a larger organisation, if you're not doing the basics, well, you need to start.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. All right, mate. Anything else that you've seen?
No, just business email compromise. We're seeing that again, but we've talked about that. We're still seeing,
massive amounts of BECs.
Yeah. We're still seeing instances where MFA wasn't on the account, but for everyone we see of that, we are seeing session token theft and bypassing of MFA through that. So yeah.
I want to do the thought bubble here. I'd love to do a white paper and understand the new, what Google's working on is the session token pinning. So that's pinned. I think that could be a game changer. So let's work on that one. Actually, I think that'd be a really nice one to see.
Yeah, well, actually, perfect timing. To a little plug, I think we've just released our white paper on Evil Gen X and session token theft. I saw that in a newsletter today, so we might include a link for that as well. I think
we should.
The show notes.
It's something that it does go into the technical side. I haven't had a chance to have a good read of it yet. I did see that come through this morning, so you are correct. But I do recommend having a read, and it puts a little bit more context at a technical level around some of the things that we've discussed. So I do recommend anyone interested, definitely go and have a read. All right, well, that wraps up this episode of Tea or Blue. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, if you want to reach out to us and ask for us to cover something in particular, reach out on LinkedIn, reach out to tealblue@triscellabs.com. More than happy to have a chat and try and include any topics that you might find of interest. Thank you. I'm Brad Morgan.
Richard Granger.
And we'll be back in a couple of weeks.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Cheers.